You are involved with the Tinfoil Hat Society, presented by Realm of the Mist Entertainment, hosted by Venus.
Just when I hit the button. I'm not a spaceship.
Well, we're recording, guys. So
Outstanding.
Welcome everyone to the Tinfoil Hat Society. You're here with your host, myself, Venus, and we're with Chris Rutter.
Hey guys,
I was wondering where you were there.
here I am.
We've got Dusty joining us.
hi.
Hi. And Salem joining us as well.
Sock drawer represent. Let's go. What is this? Is this like a fantasy football thing going on? What are we doing? Did I need to bring a hat? Did I need a hat?
You've only had me on before, Venus, but this is the Salem.
Yeah.
He's crazy. This is why we're
Nice
on your
to have
tin
ya.
hat show.
I have two different can openers. Do I need these?
Only
It
one of them.
depends.
Put the tinfoil back. It's figurative, I think.
Oh, okay. All right.
All right, go ahead.
Well, now that we've all got settled down, children. No. We're going to jump into the show tonight. We're talking about what used to be conspiracy and is now actually known as fact. So there we go. Points for the conspiracy theorist out there who believed this long time before it was verified. But we're going back to 1942, 1943, the end of World War II.
1946.
When 1946. Okay, my years are off terribly off. I don't have a script, so I'm going off memory here. I know what 1942, the war was still happening. 1943 is pretty much over, but yes, 1946. When after the Nazis had lost the war, it was conspired that they were recruited and hired by the U.S. Army to continue with their research in biological warfare testing, and their research led all the way up to NASA, which they're still using it to this day. I'm gonna leave the floor to Chris Rutter because he is the expert on everything.
So whenever it comes to this situation, actually Operation Paperclip in its conception started with the OSS in 1939 with the Allies when they started trying to recruit German scientists. At that time, they were known as Nazis. And this recruitment period went on for years. Some of them were able to defect. And as soon as the Allies won the war, circa 1945, going into 46, the U.S. and Russia basically split the bulk of approximately 29,000 top-level Nazi scientists. Over 14,000 of them became the start of what we now know as NASA, the beginning of the space program, along with the Manhattan Project. And whenever the OSS turns into the CIA, they had recruited everybody including von Warn. They started NASA. And these Nazi scientists were basically given a complete pass by both the World Court and the U.S. government because of their role in developing or beating Russia in the space race.
Yep.
So we brought them on board to develop the rockets and all of this other stuff, and it's very well documented at this point. But it wasn't the Freedom FOIA wasn't actually done on this until 2003. All of the paperwork having been gone through and becoming completely public record. Operation Paperclip wasn't fully public until 2012. So we're only 8 years into actually knowing most of the ins and outs. Now, there's still a lot of things that are conjecture whenever it comes to dealing with Operation Paperclip. But NASA, as we know it, how it was built, being stationed in Houston, the first rocket launches and everything were done not just part and parcel, but 100% by Nazis.
Yep. And you got to remember, too, Operation Paperclip didn't come around until 45, 46. Before that, it was Operation Overcast. It was
Overcast, correct.
It changed because it had a different priority at first.
That was the OSS portion of it. The Overcast was whenever they were working with the English Secret Service as well. That was the Overcast portion of it. Good job, Dusty. Good reading.
Well, yeah. When you mentioned you wanted to do the show, and Salem, I have no idea what you're talking about. And I went, I do. It's because I'm fascinated by this stuff. Unfortunately, my family was on the wrong side of that war. So a lot of it, I researched to find out why they were and what happened.
I cracked a beer and said, good luck.
It's okay.
So, before we get too off topic here, just so everyone is clear, what we did learn in history class, when they said that these Nazis were punished for their crimes against humanity and their war crimes and stuff, there were only 17 of them that were actually that were hung or killed because of this. Only 17 out of how many?
Over 29,000, and that was just of the scientific community. That doesn't include all the rest of them that ran off to Argentina.
Yeah, because we made a whole agreements that if you come over and work for us, you can bring your families and nothing will happen to you.
So that kind of makes you think like, where's Hitler?
Yeah, and the head honcho in charge of everything and developing all the protocol that was used for NASA and developing, all of the beginnings of the space race and everything, was personally involved at Auschwitz and personally involved in the murder of hundreds, maybe even thousands of Jewish refugees during the Nazi installments there, and there he is. There's even pictures of him. You can Google the images where he's sitting there with Eisenhower and Kissinger and all of these guys at the NASA Control Center at the launch of one of the first rockets. He's just sitting there chilling, having a cup of tea, and they all know very well who he is.
Yeah, Kissinger was huge on all of this, and he had he killed a lot of people. Like what was his backstory?
Kissinger,
if anyone's familiar with,
Kissinger himself. He was always involved. He was one of Hoover's understudies, and was also was militarily trained. So that's the reason he was in with the. That's the reason he was there at the beginning of the OSS, the predecessor to the CIA, and he was very interested in their tactics because their tactics were successful. As horrible as they were, what they did worked, unfortunately. So he was very interested in how they did that, how diabolical they were, and how they actually wrote up those plans and executed them. He was a huge student of what Hitler and the SS did. That's the reason he was one of the leaders of recruiting all of these guys and getting the paperwork signed, basically, pushing it across the line to get them brought over to the United States. It was basically vetted out that, we need these scientific minds, as horrible of a person they are, what they can do for us in this arms race against Russia outweighs what they did. Which is just a horrible thing to think of now. It really is.
Yeah, because they had to weigh pros versus cons. We needed to stay in the race, but at the same time, they killed all these people. I mean, they literally were seen going into concentration camps, grabbing victims to test rockets and stuff on. And yet we welcomed them with open arms because we wanted to stay ahead of the game. Was that the right thing to do? That's the question.
No.
See, that's like the moral question. But when you think about the bigger picture, I mean, if we think about morally, this is all wrong. Morally, the biological research that they've been doing, is it still morally right? Absolutely not. Altogether, does it make scientific sense? I mean, like NASA, okay, maybe NASA has done like a few cool things. and if you're not thinking morally or whatever, I mean, but a lot of people look up to NASA at this point. But now we have like not poison control centers, biological labs and stuff, and now it's like, meh, was that a good decision? I don't think so.
And if you look at it, at the time that all of this was happening, NASA was not a publicly known branch of the government, and it still isn't a branch of the government. It operates on its own outside of the government. It's just considered to be part of the government. It's funded by the government, but it doesn't actually answer to anyone in the government. And whenever all of this was happening, circa 1946 and up until the 50s, whenever we start developing the rockets and start experimenting with shooting monkeys into space and all that good stuff, the wizard, it's kind of like the Wizard of Oz. Don't pay any attention to the guy behind the curtain. Nobody knew who these leading scientists were that were developing all of these scientific programs at NASA, the rocket launching and all the science that went in with it, the Apollo missions and the moon mission and everything else was all completely led by these Nazi scientists. And the most powerful one, von Werner, actually, it was said after he died that if it wasn't for his involvement with the U.S. government, them protecting him the way that they did, he would have been convicted of war crimes many times over. And so that was kept from the public eye. NASA itself was like a big secret curtain that everybody was like, okay, cool, that's our space program, but they never let anything out to the public at all. You never knew anything until they launched a rocket successfully. There was a whole bunch of bad rocket launches and nobody fucking knew about it until, years later with the Freedom of Information Act and looking at successful launches. Then they showed the footage of these bad launches and whatnot. All of that stuff was led by Warner and all of these other guys. It's just incredible.
Someone's getting a call.
Yeah, sorry, man. Let me hang this up here. All right. Cool. Jesus. God.
Like, we're being tapped. We're being tapped.
No, because this is old news. The government knows we know about this.
Yeah.
Our fears have started already, Venus. I'm sorry. No, that's my cousin. He doesn't know I'm recording. Okay, go ahead.
Perfect timing.
And what's interesting also was that the name is literally, they would paper clips on the files of the people they wanted to recruit, which is where it came from.
Yes.
It's something that simple.
That makes a lot of sense.
That is. Is that?
I'm curious.
That's legit. Don't look at me like that.
Dusty, I know you did a lot of reading on this, and Venus, I know that you're heavily involved, like I am, whenever it comes to most of the conspiracy theories. But our third party here, who is an innocent bystander.
Yes, I am.
What, if any, knowledge do you have prior to this conversation of the involvement of these Nazi scientists? Were you aware of any of this at all?
No. The most I knew about the ingenious of Nazi scientists came down to Enigma. That was about it.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah, I have no prior knowledge. Nothing.
So how do you feel to find out that all of the stuff that all of our space race, everything was based on Nazis?
I don't give a fuck. I don't care. But I can understand the moral, standing behind it. It's to think that we had war criminals, murderers, and just horrible people assisting us in a space race that we only won because we put a guy on the moon. Like
the Apollo missions could never have happened without the Nazis.
Oh, sure,
it's that simple.
Awesome. But the Russians, they did far better than us. Without,
in the early days, they were actually beating us.
Yeah, without war criminals.
Yeah.
But
Well,
if we think about all this, like even till this day,
go ahead.
even to this day, we still do testing on humans. I mean, look, we still have the flu injection that they've been doing testing on humans, and the latest news that I heard, and I can't confirm this just yet, is that one of the women who decided to be a guinea pig with the COVID-19, oh, what's it called? The COVID-19. Yeah, I see how I'm so like, it's that time of day when I'm like, I should have a coffee before I try to communicate, but it's like it's so close to bedtime that it's like, don't do it. But yeah, the COVID-19 vaccine, she actually died 2 years later. So, and look at cosmetics. We're still testing on animals and like humans. We've come a little bit of a farther way with our vegan products and our organic products and, stuff that is less harmful, but we're still doing human testing. I mean, we can't test on a mass population without testing on a few humans to start off with.
Yes,
Well,
without human trials, we'll never know if anything's safe, unfortunately.
We deserve it.
Over the past 60 or 70 years, we have found a way to make it politically and socially palatable to have those kinds of tests because we're not killing anybody unless it's an accident. Whereas what the Nazis were doing with their human testings was to kill people to find out what the effects of freezing someone to death was, what conditions they could actually survive, or in using gases, mustard gas, and all of the other chemicals that they tried to use, with World War I and continued to develop through the Second War. They ran those tests intentionally killing people to find out what the human threshold was, so that way they could ramp up the poison or dial it back if it didn't need to be so heavy. But now we do it after, considerable amounts of money has been poured in to the development of, like V was saying, with cosmetics or whatnot. Primarily it's done on animals, which is unfortunate. But with some of the human testing that goes on with vaccinations and medical testing and things like that, here in the States, it's as simple as, here, sign a waiver, and if you complete the 6-week program, we're going to give you $5,000 if you come back every month for the next 12 months and give us an update on what you're going through. Whereas back then, what those guys were doing, Warner and Braun and all those guys, whenever they were running the rocket development programs in Berlin, they would weekly hang and execute 3 to 6 Jews that were running the assembly line too slow. So just part of the building, let alone the development of it, they were killing people just outright. So we have commercially and industrially and with the government, we have figured out ways to make it more palatable to the to the masses, so to speak. I mean, there's some evils that go with it, but we can deal with it because we're not intentionally killing people like the Nazis did, but we're still doing some really heinous shit at the end of the day. Like the lady that you were talking about, V, who tested for the original vaccine for, I believe, that was actually, wasn't that for the H1N1? That was that COVID vaccination that she tried to do and died from? It wasn't actually 19.
Yeah, I think you're right. It was the H1N1.
Yeah, this was this was actually this week, like a few days ago. She got it. I don't even know if it like in the past week, and 2 days later passed away. And it's not confirmed. I mean, I saw it on one post. But as far as that goes, I mean, like, is it okay? Like, it's okay if people are consenting to possibly dying because they might get a $5,000 reward or a $10,000 reward. So if it, like, speaking about the Nazis and stuff, so if they weren't just killing people and just testing them scientifically, would we give them a moral pass on that? That's one of my questions.
Yeah, and I think that's where the hard line is drawn there, that key word, consent. Whether you're knowingly or unknowingly admitting yourself into a scientific procedure that you may or may not die from. If you do it with consent, that changes the moral ambiguity completely. Whereas,
But
you know, the Nazis, they were just outright killing motherfuckers just to see how quickly or how they would die from this exposure to that or whatever. You know, I mean, they did it on purpose. Whereas now we do it accidentally, so to speak. You know, so it's more easy for the public to deal with.
well, I mean, it's a give or take. You're either going to get the reward, reap the rewards, or nothing's going to happen, or you're going to die. And I mean, I'm sure that it's like one of the things that they kind of like swerve away from is like, look, you have like a 50% chance of dying because we're not sure exactly what we're doing. I mean, when you go get any vaccine, they don't give you the pamphlet and they don't tell you, okay, like say for Gardasil, they don't say, okay, possibly this could happen, possibly that could happen, possibly this. You could end up paralyzed. This could happen, whatever. It's just, no, it's safe. So, I mean, are we not being given our consent because we're not being aware of what, like, the downfalls of what could happen? Because, I mean, even if you ask a doctor, like, what could happen, they just tell you it's safe, I've tested it, and, like,
See, I
the
have to
truth is
disagree with you on
that
that,
things
Venus.
can happen.
I have to disagree with you because every time I take the kids to the doctor, we talk about vaccines. They hand me pamphlets. We go through it, all the different side effects, all the things that are going to happen before I even have it administered. They do that with
But
every patient.
but
Full
here's
disclosure.
the key question. Here's the key question in that while they are informing you, are they also giving you the horrible truth of behind the scenes of, well, this many people died in the creation of said vaccine, you know, while we had to tweak it here and tweak it there, 12 people died before we tweaked it properly now that we can give it to your kids. Did they give you that information?
Well, the doctors can't because they don't know that. They're not the ones who made the vaccine. Only people that made the vaccine would have that information.
So I think that kind of proves the point. You're not wholly being disclosed, right?
But
You're being disclosed what works now, but you're not being disclosed what got you there, you know?
Or what's in the vaccine. Like, I've never been told once by anyone giving flu shots, for example, that, you know, there may or may not be fetuses in this. And I know it's conspiracy right now, but they're not saying, you know, there may or may not be aborted fetuses that we're injecting into your body when, you know, we're seeing it all over the internet and stuff. So I mean, they won't tell you that there's not any aborted babies in there, and I'm sure people have asked before, and they'll just like blow it off and say it's safe. So are we still in Nazi Germany here? Like, what's going on?
We've gone
Well, I
we've gone
think
pretty
we've
far.
left that reservation a little bit going into the vaccines, but I do believe that it does kind of tie in a little bit where we are doing some there's definitely some unscrupulous studying that is still being done and unscrupulous testing that is still being done that gets us to where we are now with vaccines and with science, which you can trace all the way back to the Nazis beginning with not NASA. We had the American public had no idea that Nazis were at the forefront of developing our space program. If our public had known, don't you think there would have been like a huge outcry to shut the whole damn thing down?
Yeah, because we see that outcry now. Like, even, I mean, like, some things may be far-fetched, some things may be a little bit off from the truth, but I mean, it all kind of started somewhere, right? And we're still, as far as I'm concerned, I don't think we're still getting all the information on everything. And there's some people that do believe that we're not getting all the information on everything. They have a huge outcry. Like, we have a huge population of anti-vax people. And I'm only using this for example just because it's relevant to lots of people. Like, we see it all the time on Facebook with our friends, like, you better get your kids vaccinated or you better not get your kids vaccinated. And so far as opinion. And most people just don't know.
Yeah. It's a very divisive subject now. It really is, because whenever I was a kid, and again, you know, like I'm usually the oldest person in the conversation, being 50, but whenever I was a kid, getting your vaccines through grade school and middle school, back to 1980, our vaccination shot basically was 3 ingredients: smallpox, measles, and mumps. And now whenever you get a vaccine, it's a vaccine for 16 to 23 different things, and there's no 100% disclosure on how much of it is effective, how much of it do you actually need. And that's why this huge division is going on, why there's so many anti-vaxxers, whenever at the end of the day, being vaccinated for the right thing obviously is good. But being over vaccinated for things that you're never going to come in contact with, is that really necessary, or is that good? That's the big question at the end of the day.
Exactly. And I mean, I'm pretty sure it was pretty shady when this was happening as well, back in NASA startup days and everything. I mean, you could give a little bit of information, but they don't need to fully disclose everything. I mean, like, yeah, we're starting up NASA. We have the best scientists in the world, and nobody would ever know shit.
Well,
And
also
actually,
back then, communication wasn't prevalent as now. They didn't have the internet or any of that stuff, so they could actually get away with all kinds of hidden stuff because people only got their newspaper.
exactly, and that's exactly right, Dusty, is because like the biggest headline or the biggest writing in any articles on, big headline, front page news stuff on the space program developing, especially going into the 50s, is the only tip of the cap was actually given that we have some of the leading scientists in the world. Most of them are, I don't know what the right term is here, but for the aeronautical and space program, the best scientist from Germany, from Europe. They glossed it over like that, instead of saying, hey, this guy was, Hitler's sixth guy. And I mean, he was friends of the Fuhrer. And we have him in downtown fucking Houston developing, the rockets to launch with. If they would have said anything along those lines, everybody would have said, hold the presses, man. That's not happening. People would have marched on Houston probably.
Oh, big time. And you got to remember also, TV was not a thing.
Right. It was in its infancy, if at all.
People got their information from going to little news bleeps in front of movies back in the 40s. And then when you get to the moon landing, my family still had to go gather at someone else's house. They couldn't afford a TV.
Yeah, so information was really limited, eh?
Extremely. So the government didn't have any fear about having to tell anyone anything because no one could find out anyway. It was that, everything was so, literally what that newspaper said, you believed because that's all you had.
Mm-hmm.
And isn't that weird how the changeover for the country as a whole, where if you look at, for most of us, the 1950s and 60s going into the moon landing, that's our parents or grandparents in most everybody's cases, how naive the country was that whatever the major news sources fed us, we accepted it not just with a grain of salt, but we accepted it as pure fact. Walter Cronkite said it was so it's so. Mm-hmm. And we never questioned anything. And there were very few people who, people who believed in any kind of conspiracy in the 1950s. You're probably talking a 1/10 of a percentile. Whereas nowadays, probably, 60 or 70% of the people you talk to believe in one conspiracy or another. Whereas back then, everybody completely believed the government was working in our best interest. They had the best people. They weren't criminals. They weren't, these horrible cancers on society. We weren't putting them to our use. That thought never crossed anybody's mind back then.
And nowadays, it's like you have to be completely insane to trust your government.
Yeah, you kind of do. To trust them wholeheartedly without questioning is kind of a sign of silliness or not being totally informed. And sometimes you do have to go on blind faith just for the best possible outcome. Sometimes you get put in a position where hope is the only only refuge a person has. So you have to operate on blind faith. But outside of that 1 percentile or whatever, the rest of the 90% of the time, you got to question in some cases what you're being told.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I don't think you can't not question. Like everything is questionable. Like the intentions of the government, what they're telling you, the purpose, the reasons behind things. I mean, look how much this like COVID-19 has been like overwhelmed by the media. I mean, like Sweden's like not on lockdown; they're doing just fine, and here we are in Canada, and we can't leave our houses. So,
You,
I
you
mean,
know, sorry, go ahead, hon.
even if yeah, even if we were to ask, like, when this was happening, like, how severe is this or anything, we don't know, we have to take precautions and blah, 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 blah. And I think now even seeing, like, these precautions are a little bit silly now that are put into place. There's still no questioning it. It's like, this is here for your safety, and we'll bring in the army if we have to. Like, we've got the army driving around big cities right now. It's pretty scary. So, but why? I mean, why, like, an army is going to save you from a cold or something? I'm still trying to understand this myself. So, like, what? Maybe people just aren't asking the right questions. Like, maybe they weren't asking the right questions before. Um, I mean, it's not like you're going to get an answer, but if you're asking questions, you should probably eventually get an answer. Someone told me one time they should always ask a question 5 times to get an answer, to get a real, an honest answer. And those 5 questions, there's only 5 of them that you have to ask: is why, and why. And you'll get your answer.
Yeah, and that's definitely going to be a topic of conversation we have for the show once the quarantines and everything are over. Once more information comes out, being able to take a deep dive into it. But back to the original topic of Paperclip and Nazi Germany and its involvement with NASA. Dusty, you read here very recently. It sounds like you did take a good deep dive on it. Out of all the information that you read, what was the most surprising to you? And I can't say earth shattering, but what was the most surprising revelation that you got from the reading that you did out of what came out of Operation Paperclip and all the Freedom of Information Act info that's come out since 2012, basically? What was the biggest shock to you out of everything you read?
Well, to be honest, not much, because it was just a refresher. Because when it first hit the news back then, I was all over it. Because, again, I have family history. So I was just going, okay, let's just refresh the memory. I already knew a lot of it.
So in your family history, are you talking about back to World War II? Your family fought against the Allies. Is that the deal?
Yeah, I'm a second generation American. My family came over from Germany.
Were
Um,
were they refugees getting away from the whole deal?
um, Oma and Opa came over in the right at the tail of the beginning of the war, that around,
Okay.
I can't try to remember, like 1940, something like that, right around in there.
So
Um,
before the wall. Okay.
okay, and they came over because Grandpa was basically told, you have to join the movement, because he was a
Mhm.
cabinet maker and they wanted him to build bridges. He was lucky. He actually got away and surrendered to some
Yeah. Very
Englishmen
lucky.
that were drunk, and he came across. And then he was able to go back and get my grandmother 2 years later. And they ended up over in New York City, basically working as servants, because nobody wanted to deal with Germans. Because over here, Germans was, that's the bad news, because, I mean, this is a bad war.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
So,
and during that time, from late 30s all the way until the 50s or 60s, first generation immigrants or even second generation families, there were a lot of like name changes going on.
yeah, well, it's because with my family, that we actually kept our last name, but the first names changed, trying to fit
Gotcha.
in more, because nobody used their last name because they were just servants. So it was Alfred and Margaret, not their original names. And it got to the point where they were getting scared right before my father was born in 1943 that they actually came out into Oswego County when there was nothing in upstate New York at that time, just to start over, because people were starting to want to lock them up in our version of a concentration camps.
Right.
So
like
they
we
had,
were doing to the Japanese, they were wanting to do that to in-country Germans back then also.
yes. So
Yeah.
they actually had to get away. So, and at the same time, my grandfather had cousins and stuff that actually were part of the Nazi movement and stayed that way right until the end and died doing it. Because what a lot of people don't realize is you didn't have a choice. When they came knocking on your door saying, hey, you need to join the movement, you either did or you died. It didn't matter. You know, you weren't Jewish. You had
The
no
crazy
choice.
thing is everybody gives Hitler and the SS and the whole Nazi party from that time before we brought them over for NASA. Everybody gives them such huge credit for the propaganda and everything, and just the mass. I don't think mass hysteria is the right term, but mass hypnosis, basically. Everybody gives Hitler so much credit for that. But what kind of gets swept under the rug is exactly what you're talking about. They went around and rounded everybody up. You're either joining the party or we're going to kill you, just like the Jews. And
And
so it
so that
wasn't a whole
my
national.
family joined up because they didn't want to die.
Right.
So,
Yeah,
but
and if given the choice, most 9 out of 10 people are going to take the life path as opposed to the dead path. Yeah, I mean
yeah,
that's just human nature.
because people are
Uh,
always like, how could the German people allow such atrocities? And it was pretty much do or die.
yeah, it wasn't allowed. It just I mean, it either happened with or without you, and the without you part meant you were dead.
So, but because I grew up with, the stories and stuff, I've always wondered why people allowed it, why it was that way. So that's why it wasn't new to me, because anytime something
So
comes out, I look at
y-
it.
your your family directly has stories of these people and how they came over and what they were part of, like in your family's story, you knew about this stuff. Is that really?
Yeah, because
Really?
well, my grandparents died when I was 12.
Okay.
But I remember them always speaking German. I actually spoke German because I didn't know, because it was normal back then. Because they didn't speak very good English, and even
Uh-huh.
back when I was little, there was nobody in the area. So when they passed on, and I was curious, how come they spoke different? My father, to this day, his W's are all V's, and he was born here. And Dad would sit down and go, well, this is what happened. This is why they came over. This is the Ellis Island. This is the paperwork. It was just that was part of our life.
Wow. So have you
Crazy.
looked into doing what's that family tree thing?
Ancestry.
Ancestry doesn't
Yes.
work because it works for anybody in this country, and people from this country connect, but my stuff is all over there. I went on Ancestry and there's nothing I could do.
Wow.
So I would love to, because I know there's family over there that I've never met, and I probably never will.
So, what was that
Right.
feedback?
Huh.
Strange.
I believe that
Pretty
was my
interesting.
internet connection, guys. I apologize.
Oh, what
Oh,
was
that's
that?
all right.
Chris?
Yeah, that was on my end.
Oh,
Okay.
Yeah, it was
So
just my internet was fluttering there for a second.
That's okay.
because I only know one cousin that came over here back when I was like 18, and that's it.
Huh.
Wow. So do you know like if they're like still alive or anything? Like do you know any information about your family back in Germany?
I only know Thurston, and Thurston only knows a little because a lot of the family scattered. My father's convinced that during that war they went to other countries, just like my grandparents did, but nobody knows where and why.
And that would be due
Oh.
a whole lot to changing the name and all of that stuff. However, they had to escape across the borders in Nazi Germany and everything, and getting over to Austria or getting over to Switzerland or coming to England. Like if you showed up and your name was von Schwarzer or whatever, you're gonna fucking die. And back then, so they had to change their name some way or another to avoid that scrutiny. Do you know of any of the name changes or anything your family took on, or is that lost?
Well, that's the thing. Our last name, which I'm not going to say here because,
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
safety,
Yeah.
was not changed. So we actually were able to find the last surviving people in this country that had the last name. Unfortunately, everybody had girls, so the name has died out with my generation. Um,
Oh,
we do know that we do know where my grandparents came from. We do know where they met. We know the street and everything, but none of us can get over there to look at the church records with someone that speaks German to find more information.
okay.
It's a
Oh.
dream of mine, but I can't get there. And now definitely can't get there with the virus. But even before then, I can't
Right.
afford to. But I know what I need. I know where I need to go. I just can't afford to.
Mm.
It seems like there would be some sort of correspondence that we could help take up to be able to find, because there's got to be some like really cool information. Well, maybe not cool, depending on which side of the fence that you're on, but there's got to be some very interesting information that could be uncovered with that, like what your family was tied in with, and who, if any of them were the bad guys, or whatever, to
I
be
just
able
want to know if they're
to
alive.
uncover.
Because
Well, that
it's
too.
interesting where most of you guys can go, hey, this is my aunt, this is my uncle. On my mom's side, yeah. On my dad's side, it's like a vacant void.
My
Huh.
family's kind of like that too. Like my mom's side was pretty much in Canada, like for a long time. But my dad actually came across from Amsterdam in 19, well, he was born in 1942. So like his grandmother, well, his my grandmother, his mom was like walked to the hospital with two rifles to her head by two German soldiers to go give birth, and then they came over shortly after that, and then her family scattered across the U.S. as well. So pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, think about that. Think about that image, guys. Like if there was to be a full color, high definition video of something like that happening now, what would the public outcry be? I mean, obviously it happens in North Korea and it happens in places in China, and that's all communist and protected. But we're all very outraged by it. But if you're able to see that scene, like, what would everybody's visceral reaction be to that? It would just be horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the worst part, like history repeats itself if you're not paying attention or anything. And that's a scary thought. Not
Right.
saying it is happening, not saying it's going to happen. I'm just saying that it's common phrase, okay? We'll keep the conspiracy out of it. It's a common phrase. History repeats itself. And like how much further do we have to actually go to get to that point though?
Yeah, there's not a whole lot separating the possibilities of that in a couple parts of the world. You've got the Saudis, you have North Korea, and of course you have communist China. And out of those three areas of the world, something really fucked up could happen where if we don't keep our guard up, that same situation could pop up very quickly and easily, and then we're at war again with the rest of the world.
And then you lose your sisters and your brothers, and who knows what could happen or where
Right.
they
You don't
could
have
be.
any connection to your aunt or uncle like Dusty doesn't. I mean, it's a very fine line that separates that from happening. We're very, very close or very far away from that being a reality, depending on how optimistic or pessimistic you are at this point in time. But the possibility is there in three or four spots of the world, and if we don't do a good job of keeping an eye out and squashing the big head whenever it pops up, then we're in danger of seeing it again, which is scary
Mm.
because we're this generation is removed far enough from World War II to miss those cues that they could be in stage one or two or three before we even realize it's happening because we're that far removed from remembering how it went down with the Germans.
Yes, learning history is good. It's definitely something people should invest their time into. They have so many series on Netflix or anything about Operation Paperclip. I'm sure they have a conspiracy show I think on Netflix They have World War II in color. I mean, there's so many things we could do. I mean, everyone's binge watching stuff. I mean, take a moment and go watch something worthwhile. So we know what to look for. I mean, lots of our grandparents aren't even around anymore, so we can't even get the information from them. So we're yeah, my millennial generation is just screwed for all that. And we get lied to in our schooling too. I mean, we like it was fantabulous that like all the Nazis were caught and punished and stuff. And now like we find out like 10 years after learning this that no, your history book was wrong. Like what?
Yeah.
How could they lie to us?
That's why I'm very careful when my kids come home with their social studies homework. I look at it with them, and then we will discuss what actually happened, because they should know.
And how confusing is that for a child to come home, not just in your home, Dusty, but hopefully there's more than a couple of people out there intelligent enough to take the same approach, not to look at rewritten history, but at actual history. To have a kid come home, be taught something by their teacher who they're supposed to respect and listen to everything they tell them, and then come home and find out what they're learning from the book is a little bit twisted, or it's leaving 90% of the story out. That's a very confusing learning environment for a child. It's got to be. It
is. And when you find out the truth, it's like you sit there and like you get like this dissociative cognizance, and you're like, well, what? Try to put everything together, like, no, that's not what happened. And then I think that's like a huge impact on the Mandela effect, is like remembering one thing one way, but then it changes, and it's like, well, no wonder why. I mean, it's starting to make sense, right?
Are we jumping into parallel universes here?
We're not. I was like hinting at different things so that like we can like like on future shows, like, yeah, we're gonna get more into this, but there's so many things that connect to each other as well. So you can't really not have one topic without slightly talking about another topic on top of that topic.
History being written by the victors, I think, is something that really takes the front line, or it really takes the onus of the discussion of Operation Paperclip, because at the time, whenever it was going on, and we recruited or stole those prisoners and put them to work for us. In most of the cases, we actually recruited them, but in some of them, we actually stole across over here to America. Looking at the way it was done then, and the fact that it took 50 some odd years for that information to become public, is it's very good evidence of the virtue that history is written by the victors. Because if it would have been the other way around, it would just be another scientific development of the Nazis. But instead, it's something that a lot of people, it piques a lot of people's interest to find out that the Nazis were so heavily involved in our space program. And there's still more information coming out to this day. Even though most of it is public information, there's a lot of unwritten history that is that still comes out, and makes that story disturbing and interesting, and just a really weird way to look at a significant portion of American history, because the space and arms race being driven so heavily by the Nazis is just a really crazy thing if you sit back and actually take a look at it, that we were at war with them, and then we used them to develop what we needed to avoid other wars and to win the Cold War, and so on and so forth. It's just weird how we were able to. It's kind of like the wind talkers or whatever that they used during World War II. Those Navajo Indians they used to do their own language, so that way the enemies wouldn't be able to decipher our code. It's just really weird how we're able to take something from the past and use it to our advantage, and that's a very American thing, it seems like.
Yeah, sounds right. sounds very right. Sounds
you're
very
not
American.
asleep. I'm good. I was wondering.
Oh, shut up. I have no knowledge. What do you want from me?
You have no knowledge.
I've got no knowledge on this. I am a bystander. I'm an innocent bystander.
What
So
are you knowledgeable on? Like, what conspiracies are you knowledgeable on?
You like urban legends, and you know
are
it.
you
That's your thing.
are you a conspiracy guy at all?
No,
He's
I'm not.
he's an urban legend guy.
I'm a guy that got pulled out of bed. Hey, we're gonna record. We're gonna record with Venus and Chris. What do you want to do? Okay. Crack a beer. Just sit back.
Okay, so then the obvious question is, after hearing all of this, obviously we've looped around and jumped into other subjects, but hearing the meat and potatoes of what Operation Paperclip was about, is that is that surprising to you to know that the American government did that, or is that like, what else did you expect to happen? Kind of reaction from you, or I mean, is there anything interesting that you've learned or that comes out of this discussion?
I have learned that humans will just read into everything and look for their little moral high grounds with all of it. Dare we admit that our thoughts and behaviors spring from the belief that the world revolves around us? That's what I got out of that.
Well, yeah, at our core, we're all very self-centered. You're right.
That's all I'm getting out of that. It's just like, oh God, we killed people for space. Okay, I get it. You know, we're Americans. They're the Germans, and they did the thing, and we brought them over because they were doing the thing really well, and we wanted to do it better. It's it's all people being a bunch of idiots.
Yeah, pretty much.
That's what it comes down to for me. It's all, you know, there's going to be a point in our histories where we will not only have been dead longer than we were alive, but the last time that our name is ever even spoken will eventually cross a threshold where it had been done longer than we were even alive. So human existence is moot. What do you want from me? What do you want from me? I'm just a guy.
That's a very philosophical answer.
That's my entire take on this is philosophy, I suppose.
Well, that's something you like to do. You like to debate philosophy. So
I suppose.
You do.
I guess that's
and math.
Oh yeah. If it's numbers and philosophy.
Like Platonism.
Venus, you want to tie this up into a neat little bow for us, or are we at the end? Or
absolutely. So, I know. I'm like thinking like, what could be our next topic for next time? So if you have any suggestions of what we should do, I know I did drop a few Easter egg bombs that we could possibly hatch coming up. Let us know in the comments, or you can get a hold of me on Facebook at Venus Chan or Solar Nova if I'm banned that week. Instagram, Venus Uncensored. You can email me at venusuncensored@gmail.com. You can find me on my Realm of the Mist, presented Had to Be Said with Venus. Did I say that right? I felt like I was talking on my butt for a second. Okay. You can find me on my page on Facebook, or you can find our new page that we just started, Realm of the Mist presents the Tinfoil Hat Society.
There you go.
Très bien.
And our sock drawer crew, let everybody know how they can find you.
All right, I guess I'll do that. So I can get a little bit of airtime. You can find me raiding Dusty's fridge because I need a beer.
I don't want to know that.
Oh, well, we're on Facebook as the Sock Drawer podcast. Is that
It's the Sock Drawer.
It's the Sock Drawer
podcast.
We have the sockdrawerpodcast.com. If you're interested in that, we're on Patreon. We're on Twitter as the Sock Drawer SD. But if you're really avid for looking for us and you want to take the quickest route, just go through Realm of the Mist. You can find Realm of the Mist anywhere that quality podcasts can be heard. And as soon as you find Realm of the Mist or new Realm of the Mist on like Pandora and Spotify, you can look for the Sock Drawer from there.
There, good job.
Go ahead, Chris.
All right, and Everybody can find me at What's Your Effin' Binge on pretty much every social media outlet. Just look for What's Your Effin' Binge or Christopher S. Rutter. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. I always feel like I'm forgetting one here. You can reach out directly to us at whatyourfnbinge@gmail.com. And you can hear our podcast, obviously, where any good podcast is found. Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, Apple, all that good stuff.
Anchor.
And Anchor.
Well, I think
That's that.
we did it. Go team.
Yay! Till next
Hooray.
time.
Hooray for us.
Hooray for us. And I think I will be the one who says goodbye because I'm going to hit the button right here, Bip.